Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tea, Tentacles, and Talk, cozy conversations about LGBTQ plus romance. I'm your host, Chloe Archer, and today I have with me the lovely Ari McKay. Ari, along with her writing partner, also known as Rachel Langella, has been writing romance in various forms for over 20 years. A retired systems engineer, she enjoys reading, writing, baking, designing, and making cosplays, occasionally watching movies and television, and playing with her dog. She spends an inordinate amount of time bringing order to her spouse's chaos, overthinking and overplanning, hurting authors in group projects, and being called upon by her children to help them with home maintenance and remodeling. She has amassed a large cache of food and books and is looking to build a compound somewhere in order to fend off hordes of undead in the imminent zombie apocalypse. That's a great bio. Welcome to the show,
Thank
Ari.
you.
How are you doing?
Doing okay. How about you?
Not too bad. we're having a bit of a heat wave here, the last sort of gasp of summer, I think. So I'm actually looking forward to some cooler fall
I think
temperatures.
we all are.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a warm summer. Not the worst I've ever had here, but for Minnesota, it's warm, so.
Definitely.
Well, I'm so delighted to have you on the show. I know that we've met before at GRL, and I'll be seeing you again at the Northern Rainbow Romance Retreat in Toronto in a few weeks. But I wanted, especially since your bio, you says you've kind of been you've been writing for like 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about your sort of your origin story and how did you get to where you are today?
It's it's actually kind of interesting. Like a lot of authors, I started in fanfic.
Oh, okay.
So 20 years ago, in fact, a bit more than 20 years ago, I started off in Fushigi Yugi,
Oh
if
my
anybody's
gosh. Okay.
familiar with that anime.
I am, yes.
Um, and I was a big fan of Chihiro and Tatsuki. So if
Oh,
people
no
remember
Tamahome.
them, I mean, that's an old anime, and I know that's, really
Yes.
old school, but that was, I mean, I go back further in fandom to like Star Trek fandom. So I was
Sure.
always, I mean, I had read plenty of K/S as I was a younger
Hmm.
person,
Yeah.
and um, then anime, it was like it was so easy to match up the guys, especially in something like a magical schoolgirl where they've got seven guys and the
Oh,
one
right.
girl, right? And
Hmm.
she's only interested in one guy. And so the other guys, it was very easy to say, well, we're not going to leave them out.
Sure.
Um,
We get stories too.
yeah, that's exactly right. And they were also very interesting characters. And so
Yeah.
I but I moved from that into a fandom which, well, has become extremely problematic lately, Potter fandom.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I mean, at the time it wasn't, of course.
Yeah,
At
of
the time it
course.
was
Yeah.
great. And I actually started off in Draco Hermione, strange
Oh,
enough.
okay.
I wrote one of the classic stories in that fandom called The Fires of Beltane.
Oh, wow.
And then from there, when I was reading, I got a lot more interested in the older characters. And of course, my
Yeah.
favorite character was Snape.
Yeah.
And when uh, when they introduced Lupin, it's like, well, he's gay. I mean, it was so obvious to
Yeah.
me. I don't care what the supposed author has said since then. Snape and
Right.
Lupin were gay and they were in love with each other. So that's where I started off in. Let's see, that was
Nice.
2002,
Mm.
either late 2002 or early 2003. And yeah, whenever Prisoner of Azkaban came out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And about that time, LiveJournal was a
Oh,
great
yeah.
big
I had a live
thing.
journal. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the main social media platform. We were
Yes.
all on it.
Hmm.
And there was a large Snape Lupin
Hmm.
community.
Mm.
on LiveJournal, and I joined that, and that's where I met Rachel Langella. At the time, her fandom name was McKay, and mine was
Mm.
Orion Rod, and we wrote. Everybody was like, "Oh, you two need to start writing together because your styles are so similar," and they
Mm.
actually were. We had very similar styles, very similar likes in
Yeah.
tropes and things like that.
Very.
And so we became part of an online role playing group
Mm.
where she was writing Snape and I was writing Lupin. And so it was a Potterverse role playing game.
Mm.
And then so we started writing fanfic together, and we wrote fanfic together for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a long time until
Yeah.
everything started falling apart in that universe.
Yeah.
And everybody was always like, well, why don't you guys, we were writing so many AUs, alternative universes at that
Yeah.
point that it was practically original fiction.
Okay.
So it's like, do we think we could do this?
Right.
Yeah, we could probably do this.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, our very first book, which is still in print, it started out as Ari McKay because we took our publishing name, since obviously my name is not Ari McKay,
Yeah. Yeah.
but because we wanted to pull in our friends who were in the fanfic
Mm.
world. We took my fanfic name and her fanfic name and made Ari McKay out of it so that people could find us,
Yeah.
because the internet was a lot wilder back then than it is now, right? There were nearly as many, like LiveJournal was like the social
Yeah,
media platform.
for sure. Hmm.
And we took a uh, premise out of one of our fanfics. We had actually made up this television show as part of our fanfics that
Oh,
Snape and
nice.
Lupin in a non-magical AU had bonded over, called,
Okay.
called Bloodbathory, which
Mm.
was about Elizabeth Bathory
Yeah.
and the horror she was visiting upon the world because she was a vampire, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that would make a really good book. Yeah. So we wrote it.
That's so cool.
And that started everything off. And Torquay Press, which was one of the
Yeah.
small
I remember, yeah.
LGBTQ publishers at that point, took the book,
Mm.
and that started everything.
That's really cool. So, do you still co-write a lot today? When you co-write, are you co-writing as Rachel Langella, or like how are you like for your published stuff? How does that
So
work?
for until 2021,
Hmm.
everything that we wrote together,
Oh, okay.
except for maybe some short stories. Like if one of us had an idea for a little short, 5, 10,000 words,
Oh,
you can,
sure.
short stories are easy.
Mm.
For the longer books and even many of the novellas, we wrote them together. And we
Mm.
wrote them since we came from a role playing background. Like, not only did we both play in the former online role playing game, we had both come from D&D backgrounds as younger
Wow.
adults back in the
Yeah.
well, even younger kids. I started playing D&D in 1977.
Oh.
Um, so maybe it was 78. It was high school. Um, and so we had always written in a very role playing style. One of us would write one character, one of us
Oh,
would write the
sure.
other. And so it was very organic.
Mm.
There was one, the very first fic we wrote together, we did it by chapter. And so we both wrote
Okay.
both characters and switched off, but we decided we didn't like that because we were
Yeah.
both more comfortable with the role playing style.
Right. So
And
alternating
then,
POV.
right. So
Yeah.
yeah, we would do alternating chapter POV.
Mm.
We've only ever written one book in first person.
Oh,
Everything
okay.
else is third
Sure.
person.
Mm.
And yeah, so everything up until 2021 was written that way.
Yeah.
And we went through a really bad block, both of us, at the same
Mm.
time, unfortunately, but it was for
Oh.
similar reasons. In 2019, when a publisher who will not be named kind
Yeah.
of screwed over an awful lot of us,
Yes.
and stopped paying us.
Right.
I mean, we had been putting out 4 and 5, maybe 6 books a year, right?
Yeah.
Just cramming them out. And
Yeah.
then that hit, and it was hard enough even to keep that going with the presidential situation in 2016.
Right.
So that was hard, and actually writing was kind of an escape for both
Sure, I can
of us.
imagine.
And
Yeah.
then we had Torquay went out of business. Right
Mm.
after that, the other publisher screwed us all over.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit.
Right, the pandemic.
And it was like this perfect storm of just horrible things because I had to take a lot of my attention from writing to getting all of our rights back, recovering and
Yeah.
republishing almost 40 stories.
Oh gosh.
So,
Yeah.
because I mean, we had a pretty big back catalog. A
Yeah.
lot of it was short stories and novellas.
Okay.
So, a lot of them were like, okay, anthology time.
Yeah.
And just, it's like, okay, I cannot recover every
Yeah.
single one of these
No.
because it
Yeah.
gets pricey, right?
Oh, for sure.
And I don't have a lot of talent at making covers. Um, I
Yeah.
rely on people like Diane Thice for her talent in making covers. But yeah, so it well, to get back to your question,
Yeah.
about 2021, I started getting back my mojo, but Rachel was still having a slump for various personal reasons.
Sure.
So I wrote a book called A Prince Among Men,
Mm.
and she edited it
Okay.
because she's an English professor. So
Mm.
we've always done our own editing, except, well, for our indie books, we've always done our own editing because this is what she does for a living, right?
Sure,
She
sure.
edits. And so it has become, because of her schedule and things that are going on in her life, I am now writing the books and she is editing them, though we both tend to plot them. So, like, we'll
Oh.
sit down and we'll plot them, and I will write the first draft and she'll go through and edit it.
Mm.
So, we've kind of evolved
Yeah.
from that. I mean, she's hoping to get back to us
Sure.
writing the way that we used to,
Yeah.
but I wrote Prince Among Men. We co-wrote the first part of Key Change before she just couldn't do it anymore. And then I wrote Gods and Monsters and Airs Above the Ground.
Yeah.
But she was in on the plotting. She did all of the editing. She made lots of suggestions. So I
Yeah.
still consider us co-authors.
Sure. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really cool. I haven't actually talked with a lot of authors who started out as a co-writing duo and sort of have made that their primary kind of focus in publishing, right? I think I know some people that I've talked to started out solo and then they kind of do occasional co-writing projects. But yeah, I mean, that's really amazing. And I think from everything that I've been sort of told about co-writing, if you found each other in fandom and had, a kind of creative symmetry and connection with each other, that's sort of like the perfect
Yes.
place to, really grow that and turn it into something amazing. That's really cool. Um, I mean, was it entirely sort of like an interest in Slash, or how did you get into sort of focusing on MM more exclusively since I know you mentioned doing some like Hermione Draco kind of stuff. So, were you always interested when it came to actually publishing and doing LGBTQ romance, or did you also try other stuff?
Actually, the Draco Hermione one that I wrote was the only MF I've ever written.
Mm.
And I wrote that after I had already started writing MM in the Fashugi Yugi
Yeah.
universe. So I think I've always had a pull towards people in love against the odds,
Mm.
where they have to be together no matter what, family or social or whatever disapproval. And of course, I started writing MM long before gay marriage was legal.
Right.
And I've always had a pull to these people who have to be together no
Mm-hmm.
matter what the stigma, of
Mm-hmm.
course, at the time. And I honestly credit the fact that I grew up with my mother's brother was gay and out in
Mm.
the 70s. So
Wow.
since the time I was a child, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was exposed is the wrong word. I was in that and aware of it from the
Mm.
time I was very, very young. He
Yeah.
and his partner, who were together for, oh my God, 50 years.
Oh, wow.
They were together for a very long time. Yeah, it had to be 50 years that they
Mm.
were together, until my uncle passed away.
Yeah.
Um, they had a condo on South Beach,
Awesome.
fabulous parties.
Oh, I
I
bet.
they were these great people,
Yeah.
and I was always aware of that, and it nothing about it ever struck me as wrong or bad. It was just like, look at this. They're just a couple like
Mm.
any other couple.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're together, they worked together, they had people over,
Yeah.
so to me this was just something that I totally knew. And then as an adult, I became aware that, gee, they're not getting treated,
Mm-hmm.
the same way
Right.
as a man and a woman together are. And gee, that's just not fair. And so fictionally I was always pulled towards characters who, you know were fighting against the social
Right.
norms and stuff to be together. That, I guess it comes down to love conquers all, right?
Right.
So I
That's at the heart of romance for sure. Yeah, and I think, as a queer person myself, growing up, I was always like constantly trying to search for stories where I could find myself and my other queer friends represented. And it was really hard. And I mean, I was, growing up and coming out in the 90s, basically. But like that was only the internet was like only kind of just sort of starting. And like, I mean, there just, there really wasn't access to a lot of stuff at all, apart from like really depressing, sad, like cautionary tale type narrative. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's like a major kind of impact that our genre can have in terms of just having like positive, uplifting, hope-inspiring stories for queer readers is really important. Um, that's really great. So I want to kind of circle back to you know, the fact that you've been doing this in various capacities for 20 years. And as a newer author myself, I'm always really interested in what kind of advice do folks who've been doing this for a long time have in terms of sort of making a writing career a more lifelong, sustainable endeavor, because obviously there will always be periods of up and down, like you mentioned, kind of sort of either block or burnout. I know, everyone I've talked to who's kind of like 10 years or more has sort of said, oh yeah, like this kind of stuff happens. So how do you kind of like weather those storms and sort of keep going as a writer?
Well, for me, because I was never trying to do it as
Hmm.
writing was something I needed to do. I had these
Yeah.
stories. Rachel and I both had these stories inside of us that just needed
Yeah.
to come out, right?
Mhm.
And so we were always, and I think this would be my advice to any writer: write for yourself.
Yeah.
First and foremost, write for yourself, because otherwise you're not being authentic. You are
Mm.
not bringing to your writing, what something that's going to fulfill you,
Yeah.
right? If you're writing to a market,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not, I mean, if, and what happens is I think people who become very famous very quickly happen to be telling the authentic stories at the time that the market is good for that particular story.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we started out, we were doing very, very, very well. And we were doing bodyguard stories, right?
Oh,
Contemporary was the thing back then. Okay. So in like when we started getting published in 2012 was when
mm-hmm.
our very first book came out.
Yeah.
We started writing in 2011 as far as towards, publishing, but we started in late 2011. So our book wasn't finished till 2012.
Okay. Mm.
And that first book, which was it's the Blood Bathory book, Like the
Yeah,
Night,
yeah.
and it was turned down by one publisher that kind of broke our hearts, but that's okay. Torquay took it. Torquay was the
Yeah,
second
yeah.
place we pitched it, and I will always love B.A. Tortuga and Julia Talbot for their encouragement and their love. These women are incredible, and they
Yeah.
were so good with shepherding along new authors like
Mm.
myself and some others. And
Yeah.
that's where I met people like Jodi Payne and Sean Michael and
Yeah. Oh, people who've been, yeah, doing this a long time. Yeah.
right. In fact, Sean Michael was one of the first commercial authors I ever read. So it was
Mm.
like, and then Sean was fabulous as far as like I could ask questions and Sean would answer me. And it's like Sean is like this such a big name, right?
Uh,
And but for authors coming into it, I really, really do suggest that they tell the stories they need to
mm.
tell from whatever's inside of them, whatever's driving them to write. Because I've never known an author that wasn't driven by something,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
whether it was a coping mechanism to get something out
Mhm.
or, just the voices in their head are screaming at them to tell these stories.
Right.
You know, follow your heart, follow, your gut,
Mhm. Yeah.
and make sure that what the story that you're telling is something that you are going to be proud of to tell and not something it's like, oh, I can't look at that because I hacked it together and
Right.
you know
Right.
do something that makes you happy and fulfilled, because
Mm.
when push comes to shove, let's face it, how many authors actually make an actual living from
Hmm.
it?
Right.
I mean, I know a lot of authors, and most of us had day jobs because
Yeah.
the writing wasn't going to pay the bills. We wrote because we had to. It was
Right.
just this internal pressure. Like a
Mm.
painter has to paint, even if they're not
Yeah. Oh,
successful.
yeah. Yeah. It's a
It's
compulsion.
it is. It really is a compulsion.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I have a day job still, and I think many new authors have, especially, ones like myself who like dreamed of being an author since they were a kid, right? Have often like had a dream of like being a full-time author, but I will say through doing this show and talking with a lot of other authors, I'm sort of I've come to a place where I'm like, I'm pretty cool keeping the day job. As much as it would be like so great to like write all day, I also know that sometimes I can not be the best at managing my own time. But just the amount of pressure that when you are trying to make it your living, puts on the writing process, like, each book has to be successful in a certain way in order to like pay your bills and that kind of stuff. I feel like, at least for me, it would diminish my enjoyment, and I would feel a lot more pressured to write to market in particular ways that I would not necessarily enjoy. Because, I mean, I definitely started writing. The first book I wrote was very much like a book I needed to read during the pandemic. And everybody, when I told them the concept for this book, right? They're like, aliens with tentacles in Las Vegas. Like what is this, right? And but I was like, no, it's going to be really funny. And but it was like the book of my heart, like that. And even when people kind of side-eyed, I was just like, you know what? Some people will like it, and that I'm happy with that. But I
Right.
had so much fun writing it, and so I definitely try to hold on to that enthusiasm and joy that you get from writing the kind of stuff that you love, even if it isn't always perhaps something that's big in the market now. I'm very like optimistic in the sense that like even if I have a book that comes out that's not super successful right now, it could be 3 years from now or something, right? Like we've seen lots of instances, especially recently with like the advent of TikTok and other things where older books are sometimes getting revived in really interesting ways unexpectedly. And then like, so you just never know, right?
No, you don't ever know. And like my goal as a writer, as far
Mhm.
as my own personal fulfillment, not, as I mean, I want people to enjoy my stories, absolutely.
Yes.
But I want to be able to look at every single book I've ever written and be happy. To look
Yeah.
at it and go, "Yay, I remember," to bring back the feeling. If I look at a book, it's like
Mhm.
I like remembering how I felt when I was
Oh.
writing that. I
Mm.
like remembering how the characters were speaking to me personally, or sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, my characters have hidden messages that, I'm trying to put an energy out into the world. Like, you know, with with Mario in Airs Above the Ground, his hidden message is people have loved before. Don't ever try to believe that you're any less because you weren't first.
Mm.
So because he gets involved with someone who has lost his husband,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
it's like, at first he's like, well, gosh, if that was his great big love, how am I ever going to compete? And then he realizes I'm not competing. What he felt for his first husband, is different than what he feels for me, but it's no less,
Right.
so that is, that's the message I was trying to get out in Airs, and I was so thrilled that several reviewers picked up on it.
Oh, that's great.
And
Yeah.
it's like, yes, I was successful in trying to convey that you don't have to be first. First time love is great, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but
Mhm.
you don't stop loving just because someone dies. You don't
Right.
have to stop loving. I mean, some people do. I mean, but
Yeah.
that doesn't have to be the end of your romantic journey,
Sure.
or
Yeah,
your connection to other people.
yeah. I mean, I definitely believe the human heart has the capacity to love many people in a lifetime in different
Yes.
ways, right? So, and I think romance is a great genre for sort of like illustrating that. But I mean, this is a perfect segue, I think, into talking a little bit about your latest release, Airs Above the Ground. Can you tell us a little bit about it and sort of like the bigger series, The Carnival of Mysteries?
Okay. Okay, I'll start with the carnival because
Okay.
the background is kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, cool.
Um, so Rachel and I used to binge watch shows together, less now because she's had less time. But
Mm.
one of the things we became utterly obsessed with many years ago was Carnival.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that was almost entirely because of Clancy Brown, because I am an enormous Clancy Brown fan.
Mm.
We both are. But it's like she had seen like the first few episodes and she's like, you've got to watch this. We've got to watch this
Mhm.
together. And so we
Yeah.
started watching it, and it's like, oh my God, this is so interesting because it was so different
Mm.
from anything else, right? The whole thought
Yeah.
of this semi magical traveling carnival and the people in it and what they did. And so it's like, we should write that. We
Yeah.
should write a carnival. And so it's like we had this whole back and forth. And so maybe, oh gosh, what's it been, 8 or 9 years ago? So we
Mm.
had this thought, and Arante and Rafe, who are the protagonists in Gods and Monsters.
Yeah.
Their story was actually the thing that kind of we fleshed out way back then. I mean, we hadn't written the book, but we had notes and everything about,
Oh,
oh,
sure.
yeah. And so we had planned to have the carnival and do a whole series ourselves where
Mm.
we had the carnival go to different worlds. And we were, it, it got on the back burner because we were writing other things. And then kind of the slump happened and
Yeah.
COVID and all that. And it's like, we're never going to be able to do this justice,
Okay.
especially when we went to publishing two, or if we're lucky, three books a year, as opposed to like the six or seven we used to be
Yeah,
doing.
sure.
And it's like, but this idea is so cool. We were both, totally in love with this idea. And so I talked to her and I said, what do you think about after Megan Maslow's Magic Emporium, which we were
Yeah.
invited to be part of, and being part of the Emporium was fabulous. I loved it.
Mm.
And it's like, what do you think about us opening this up to other authors? And she's like, if you want to run it, go for it. I'm not hurting cats. I'm like, okay, I'll hurt the cats. I've herded cats for years.
Right.
And so I put the idea out there because I had already done a lot of this development about, we had already decided that, Arante and Rafe were the characters that were running it. And we'd already decided on several of the acts. Madame Persephone got in there very early. Um, and Nick, who does all the running of the rides and stuff in the carnival,
Oh, sure.
nobody yet has guessed who he is, which is like, dang it.
Mm.
He actually is a real historical figure, and
Mm.
nobody's come up with who he is. And
Oh, interesting.
I even put a really big clue in there, but oh well. Um, Maybe I was too subtle. Uh, so I was really overwhelmed with the response of people who wanted to be part of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, great. And so I started herding that. And so, but I wanted to do Arante and Rafe because they were, this was the story I knew. This was already in my head
Yeah.
for, it had been living rent free in my head for, years.
Mm.
So I did that. And one of the, acts in the carnival that has been a permanent act in the carnival is the flying galliers, who are the aerialists.
Mm.
And so Mario Gallier, who was the youngest son, so I was enchanted with the idea of this Peter Pan character, right? He was 15.
Mm.
He'd been 15 for over 100 years.
Oh, wow.
Well, why grow up if you don't have to? He's living and working in a carnival. He's eternally young, and being young with all the hormones and stuff, he's always interested in things. And so Mario was kind of this mascot almost
Sure.
for the carnival. And Rachel and I were talking about what book to come next after Gods and Monsters, and it's like, what if Mario meets the man he wants to grow up for?
Mm. That's a great idea.
But he looks 15. He's over 100 years old. And so
Yeah.
this guy looks at him and like, cute kid, you know, and so that's where it all developed from. So the whole
Interesting.
thing about trying to, though I did have to, one of the funniest parts of the book is that I knew Mario was magical,
Mm.
right? And what I had originally figured he and the other Galliers were ended up being very different than what they became in the book.
Mm.
Um, because anybody who has knows 1980 movies will
Mm.
know exactly what they were originally going to be in the beginning.
Mm.
Because there are characters named Paul and Irina who are Galliers.
Mm.
So anybody who knows that, it's from the movie Cat People.
Mm-hmm.
And I just borrowed the names because it's like, at that point I had no intention of writing the story. It's just like aerialists. Okay,
Right.
the kids from that movie grew up in a circus. And so I
Right.
shoved them in there. And then it's like when we started on Airs Above the Ground, I can't make that. That's like going to be copyright infringement or something. It's one thing to borrow the names. Like like Nick's name and everything. It was one thing to just borrow names and the idea, but it's like I can't make them that kind of shifter because that's bad. I could claim the names are coincidence, but if I made them that kind of shifter, no. Um,
Right. Okay, so I have to ask, just as a bit of a film buff myself. So, like, was there like, because the original Cat People was from the 1940s by Jacques Tourneur.
exactly.
So was there a remake in the 80s that I'm not knowing about?
Oh yeah, with it had Malcolm McDowell
Oh,
and
wow.
Nastasia Kinski.
Oh, okay. So I have to see this because I have seen the original
Oh,
Jacques
so have
Tourneur
I.
Cat
I've seen
People.
that and I've seen
Uh,
Curse of the Cat People.
yes, the sort of sequel-esque. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, fascinating. All right. So no, I'm very familiar with the old ones, but I did not know there was a remake in the
Oh,
80s.
there was a remake where they made them actual Black Panther shifters.
Oh, wow. Okay, very cool. Neat.
So, oh yeah, I it's campy in a 1980s way, and Giorgio
Mm.
Moroder did the music, so you can imagine the whole disco theme, but David Bowie sung the theme song.
Oh, wow. I don't know how
So
I missed this.
I don't know how you missed it either. I mean, it's an 80s campy classic.
That's amazing.
Um, but so I couldn't make them Black Panther shifters
Right, right.
because that, like I said, borrowing a name is one thing just because you like the name.
Ah,
And we tend to fill our books with a lot of pop culture references
I
that
do too,
you
yeah.
know people will get or they won't.
Mm.
Um, but then I was decided, okay, maybe I'll make them bird shifters because they're the flying galliers.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then as everybody else was doing their books for the second round of Carnival, we ended up with a lot of bird shifters. It's like, oh, great. What am I going to do now? Right?
Yeah.
I don't want yet another, bird shifter,
Mm.
considering how many bird shifters ended up in the second round of Carnival.
Wow.
So it's like, And I thought around and I came up with something that I
Oh,
like, and I'm not going to give it away.
oh,
Um,
okay. Just
yeah,
tempt
it's
people
because
in with
it
the
ends
book.
up being a big part of the book and
Okay,
Mario's inner turmoil about what he is.
sure.
Um,
Okay,
but I was happy with the way it played out.
nice.
Um, but yeah, it's like it just goes to show how things can change
Oh, yeah.
while you're doing it, especially as part of a group project, right?
Mm.
Um, like, oh my goodness, the next book we have coming up is part of Road to Rocktoberfest. We were in the
Yes,
2023 and now we're in 2024. It's
nice.
like, okay, I want to do a cellist. And then
Ooh.
it turns out that Anne Barwell's doing a violinist. So
Ah,
I'm doing a heavy metal cello player and she's doing a heavy metal violinist. But we actually wrote a scene together that's going to be in both of our books
oh,
where
cool.
they meet up and talk.
Oh, neat. That's
But it
really
just
neat.
goes to show how two people can have like the same idea, even in the same series. And, you're just playing with a trope. And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, we're going to end up with the same book. I mean, obviously it won't be the same, but
Right, right.
the same theme.
Yeah. Yeah, I've only recently started doing some like collaboration projects like this, and I have found it really interesting kind of how they play out. So, in the Fortune Favors the Fae series, which I think you're also in that too, aren't you?
No,
Oh, you're
no,
not?
no.
Okay. I can't keep track of like who is in everything anymore,
Oh
but
yeah, because almost everybody's part of something these days.
right, right, yeah. Well, and I mean, these kinds of multi-author worlds or series often, are attractive, especially partly because they're playing on some kind of particular theme or trope or
Mhm.
whatever. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the writing of this book? So, you'd mentioned kind of like you've been writing this a little bit more yourself, kind of plotting and having your co-writer edit for you. What was the hardest part of writing this book, and what was the easiest part?
So the hardest part was he's an aerialist.
Mm,
I'm not an aerialist, right? Oh, I love going to Cirque du Soleil show, and that's the
Sure.
image I had in my mind of what
Yeah.
he joins something in Las Vegas very much like Cirque du Soleil.
Okay.
It's called Circo del Arts.
Yeah.
Um, with they have a performance space in a casino. So anybody who's been to Vegas will know exactly
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Sure, sure.
But so the hardest part was describing what they're doing
Oh, yeah.
because it's like you have to. I mean, I had to do so much research on what the aerialist moves are and what the hardest moves are and what kind of background an aerialist would come from because Ilya, um, Mario's love interest,
Yeah.
um, was a Ukrainian gymnast, a
Oh,
Ukrainian Olympic gymnast who,
wow.
after he retires from Olympics, comes to the US because he met somebody at the Olympics. He met an American Olympic gymnast. And
Mm.
so falling down that rabbit hole, and it's like, I really have to get this book written. I can't sit here watching videos on YouTube of Olympic gymnasts, even though I
Right.
could for the next 10
Yeah,
years
yeah.
because it's,
Right.
fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But so coming up with the names and the
Oh,
moves and
yeah.
how the move should be held and how long it should be
Yeah.
held for, and then going into how there's Olympic still rings are about as close as aerial as it comes to what the skills are on aerial straps in something like a
Mhm.
Cirque show.
Yeah.
So figuring out the names and the kind of training that they have to go through because the whole entire thing takes place pretty much in this show.
Yeah.
Once Mario leaves the carnival, he is totally swept up in this whole non-magical world of performing in this Vegas show. And
Yeah.
so and getting ready to perform in the show and the makeup trials and tests and dress
Yeah.
rehearsals. Fortunately, I have a theater background, so that part,
Oh, that
I
helps.
didn't
Yeah.
have to look up parts of a stage. I already knew that.
Right.
But so that was the hardest part and took the most time because
I bet.
I wanted people, I'm a very strangely visual writer as
Mm.
far as I have to be able to see the scene in my head
Yeah, me
as
too.
I'm writing it.
Yeah.
So and I think that comes from having a D&D role playing background, right? Is that this
Mm.
visualization.
Yeah.
And so I could see what they were doing in my mind and how I wanted them to like rotate around each other. But I had to find the names for that and what was possible and not possible
Sure.
for
Sure.
humans to do. So that was yeah, that was the hardest part. The easiest part, oh goodness. I think that would be um the parts that involve the Carnival of Mysteries because having written Gods and Monsters, I had the carnival down. So
Right. That
I
helps.
so all of the parts like at the beginning and then at the end with the carnival, that was like, great, I've already done this work.
Yeah.
I know who these characters are and what they're doing and what they would say. So yeah, that was the easiest part.
That's really cool. Um, So I know we're getting close to the end of our time
Really? Wow.
today. I know it goes
Goes
by.
fast.
Yes. We've talked a lot about your writing and all of that. Most writers, of course, are obviously avid readers as well.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the kind of stuff that you like to read, and do you have any recent book recommendations?
So, strangely enough, I don't read a lot of romance anymore.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
I
Okay.
have my favorite authors, and when they come out with a new book, I'll one click
Yeah.
people, just as quick as the next person. It's like, yeah, I won't miss, an Eden Winters or a Megan Maslow, you know, those, those people are okay, we're reading this.
Yeah, right.
But for the most part, I have been always my whole life a science fiction reader.
Mm.
So I read massive amounts of science fiction. Strangely enough, military science fiction.
Oh, wow.
I
Oh,
read. yeah, space battles. I'm all about the space battles. So I've read a lot of that, and I read a lot of fantasy.
Mm.
In fact, my one of my biggest comfort reads is The Dragon Riders of Pern.
Oh, okay. Yeah, classic.
Whenever it's like, okay, I'm burned out, I need to reset the brain, I need to find it, I need to just find this escape. I go right
Sure.
back to Pern.
Yeah.
Or to Anne McCaffrey's Freedom's Landing, which is a
Mm.
sci-fi.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and lately I've gotten a lot into strangely enough, zombie post-apocalyptic zombie
Ooh.
uh stories.
Okay.
Or a lot of post-apocalyptic. They don't all have zombies, but
Mm.
so I read The Dark Tide Rising by
Mm.
John Ringo, who is, I have discovered lately, a somewhat problematic author as well. But it's like, I hate it when I really enjoy something and then you find out that the writer, it's like,
Right.
okay, I would never be his friend.
Right. I
It's like,
know. It's yeah, I feel like there's a lot of disappointment these days around that.
well, I try, and I guess it's coming from the fact that in the pre-internet days, we didn't know who these writers were. We just, it's like
Yeah.
you picked up a book if the premise sounded interesting and you read it, and who the author was, who
Hmm.
cares? Right? I mean, even if you really liked their books, it's like there was no information on the authors other than what little blurb the publisher would put on the back. And so
Right.
I still approach books from that kind of perspective. It doesn't ever occur to me to go research an author before I read their books.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then it's like when you get, oh gosh, what was I, 7 or 8 books down in the series? And it's like, wait a minute, I don't like these things he's saying. Because
Mm.
something came up. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I went and looked, and it's like, oh my God, how did I miss this until this book? Unless he was like not really being overt about it.
Yes. Yes.
So it's then like, it's like, okay, so that just kind of spoiled all the thing. So I don't necessarily recommend Black Tide Rising. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
if you don't want to read problematic authors.
Yeah.
But and then I just read in fact I finished it last night, was The Gordian Protocol
Mm.
by David Weber, and I forget, he had a new co-author. I don't
Oh,
remember
okay.
the name of the co-author, but I just finished that last night, and that's a time travel, multiverse travel
Oh,
book.
wow. Okay. Hmm.
So that was actually really interesting.
Yeah. So would you ever write like some military sci-fi or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have various plots, that have percolated in the background. It's just that none of them have ever stepped forward
Oh,
in
sure.
front of like the carnival books. It's
Yeah.
like Gods and Monsters had to be written. It was one of those things that was like, okay, I've got to get the story out
I,
because I need the story to exist.
yeah, yeah.
And it's, as much as I love military sci-fi, it's like no characters have stepped forward. Usually it's not the book stepping
Yeah.
forward, it's a character stepping forward
Yes,
and
for
saying,
sure.
write me, write me, write me. And so far, none of the kind of military plottish, and we have what we call, our plot bunny list. We've got over
Yes.
100 different
Oh, yeah.
stories on that, where it's like, when it used to be, when we got stuck, we would just go, oh yeah, this one, that was a really cool idea. Let's,
Uh,
and then that'll be the story that comes forward.
right, right,
So
right. Yeah, you got to go where the muse takes you
you
and yeah,
do.
yeah, for sure. Well, can you tell my viewers and listeners here a little bit of like what can we expect from you going forward? What have you got in the pipeline that's yet to come out or what can we
Well, right.
anticipate?
Oh, sorry. Right now there is a book that will come out on the 24th. I think it's the 24th. It's a Rachel Langella called Tagged. It's a
Ooh.
short story. It's actually just a 99 cent. In fact,
Oh
if I could
yeah.
have made it free on Amazon, I would have, but that came from an author retreat that I went to in March.
Oh, nice.
We went to New Orleans and we decided to write this series of, they're not even connected other than they all take place in New Orleans. It's called Hot
Okay.
Nights in the Big Easy.
Oh, fun.
And mine is about a graffiti artist who
Oh.
tags the wrong
Ah,
building,
ah,
or
ah,
maybe the
ah.
right one,
Oh,
depending
yeah.
on how you look at it.
Fun.
And so it's just a little, it's like 7,500 words. It's a very quick short story.
Very
And
cool.
then coming out on October 27th will be High Strung, and that's an Ari McKay book
Nice.
in the Road to Rocktoberfest, and it's about my cello rocker.
That's cool. Yeah, that sounds
And
fun.
it's a friends to enemies to forced proximity toleration to friends to lovers.
I love it.
So
That
these
sounds
guys,
very
I'm
metal to
putting these
me.
guys through the ringer.
That's awesome. Well, that sounds really great. Thank you so much, Ari, for taking the time to
Oh,
sit
thank
down
you for
with
having
me
me.
today. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and I will look forward to seeing you in a few weeks up in Toronto.
Definitely. And then the cruise.
Yes, yes. I actually I am not going to be able to go on the
Oh,
cruise in 2025. I had already committed to Shimmer and Rare in the
oh,
UK.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And just in terms of costs for that trip, it's going to be expensive, but I'm hoping to come back in 2026.
I'm hoping you can too, because that
Yeah.
was so much
It was
fun.
so great. Yeah, for anyone who's thinking about the Rainbow Readers Cruise, we both very strongly recommend it. It was amazing.
Best
Um,
signing ever.
yes. Oh, it was a lot of fun. I had a wonderful, wonderful time. Yeah.
Me
So
too.
very, very well organized. All
Okay.
right. Well, thank you to
Thank
all of the
you.
viewers and my listeners too for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.